We're talking about what? Trump versus Biden. How did we get here? Is that the premise of today's conversation?
Yeah. So just kind of maybe even broader than that. It's just kind of like, what's the general state of affairs with our political system? How is it that out of 330 million Americans, of which the numbers were somewhere in the ballpark of 150 million are qualified to be president, you know, born in the United States, over 35, etc. How is it that these are the two best choices that we've come up with? Or maybe we isn't exactly the right term to use. How is it that these are the two best choices that our two political parties have provided us?
Yeah. Regardless of how they're there, it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, like it, you know, like I hear this term a lot, or this phrase a lot, where people are like, well, I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that I don't always want to vote against the Democrats or against the Republican parties. You know, sometimes they may have the best candidates, but I just can't imagine that in 2020, after what Trump's gone through, the goods and the bads. I don't want to sit here and like bash Trump and bash Biden.
Right.
But like, you take the goods and the bads of Trump, you look at the goods and the bads of Biden, and it's like, are these really the best two people that we could come up with?
Especially when there seems to be so many more level-headed options early on. Again, I don't think anyone's perfect, but shit.
Yeah, right.
Like you got one guy who's just really loud, and I did not know that a presidential person could use Twitter so hard. You know, in the end, the other guy just seems clueless half the time and doesn't know where he is. I'm like, really? These are the people we're picking between?
Right. And I also think that it says something that they're both, what, mid-70s, white males, which has been just the president throughout all of U.S. presidential history, save Obama. And it's like, so, yeah, I don't know. I could get into so many different conversations right now just off that alone. But it's like, I don't know anybody that is in the best state of their life at 77 years old. And don't get me wrong, like, you've collected 77 years worth of wisdom and knowledge and experience.
Sure.
But your cognitive abilities are certainly diminishing at that point. Like, I don't know anybody that peaked at 75. That's the average lifespan of an American is 77.
I guess when you put it that way.
Like, that's the average year that you die is 77 years old. And, you know, I'll look it up again real quick. It varies for men and women.
But still,
in the U.S.
It's around there.
Yeah, 78 and a half.
Oof.
And that, yeah. And men traditionally die sooner than women. So men are going to be on the short side of that 78 and a half, and women are going to be on the long side of that. And so anyway, like, the likelihood that these presidents die this year or next year is high.
Ooh, that's rough. I had not considered that. It's a new thought for me. Yeah, that's interesting.
Trump is 74. Biden, 77.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump's just running on amphetamines at this point. I don't mean that literally. He might be. I don't know. But it seems like he's on something.
Right.
He's got some passion.
He is always like, yeah, riled up. That's a good way to put it.
Yes, absolutely. So the more that I started thinking about this, the more, so it kind of resulted in the displeasure of our choices that we have available to us. And, I want to be very transparent. There are obviously other choices beyond Biden and Trump, but if you talk to anybody in the United States, they're probably going to recognize that those are our only two viable choices.
Sure.
And so it almost feels like this is by design, that we've we've consolidated all of the people who have an opportunity to become the leader of the United States down to 2 people every single year since I think it was like 1865 the last time a non-Democrat or Republican won the office.
I mean, that's optimistic for me because I didn't even know that was a thing. So that's cool
What do you mean?
that someone who wasn't a Democrat or a Republican has ever won office.
Yeah, so if you look back in history, like the original parties were like the Whigs and you had the Federalists.
Okay,
and all
that's
this.
right.
So,
That's right. I remember that.
so the parties have evolved over time. And what is also interesting is that you'll see the political parties kind of almost switched ideologies. So Abraham Lincoln, we all know he's got massive credits and accolades. He was a Republican candidate. And so you can see how the parties kind of shift their views and their ideologies throughout time. So I don't want to just assign an ideology to a political party because
Sure.
over the span of 100 years or longer, it varies, it changes.
Or at least
people's
hopefully
needs.
it does.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So maybe that's a good spot to kind of start this conversation is what I see right now is you've essentially got a spectrum of left and right, and most people will be familiar with these terms. On
Yeah.
the left, you've got liberalism, and on the right, you've got conservatism. And pretty much every party that we have picks and chooses different topics or platforms based on, and their position on those topics and platforms based on some point on that scale of liberalism to conservatism. So like you can be socially liberal, socially conservative, fiscally conservative, and any mix in between that. You've got like the libertarians who tend to kind of be like, they'll have liberal social ideas, like everybody can smoke pot, for example, that would be legal. And they tend to be very fiscally conservative, like everybody has to abide by the gold standard. The Democratic Party right now tends to be left on both accounts. They're very socially liberal, as we've seen throughout, this year especially. And they also tend to be pretty fiscally liberal, meaning it kind of falls into Keynesian economics and the idea that you can run deficits for government funding and maintain the longevity because you're growing and kind of outpacing your debt. And so, and then of course the Republicans tend to be conservative on all accounts as well. So like there are just tons and tons of different ways to slice and dice this depending on which party you're looking into.
Right.
But yeah, I think like one of the spots where I feel failed as a citizen and like not somebody who has a lot of influence and power or anything like that, like just a everyday person.
Just a dude.
Yeah, just a dude. I feel failed because the interests of both of our core political parties these days seems to be that of the wealthy, of the elite.
I feel that.
So you kind of get the feeling too, and I think a lot of people might get that feeling as well. I don't know, like the Democrats, like if you think about what democratic means, it's like for the people, and so they've tended to kind of hung their hat on we're for the people, and in fact that's what Joe Biden's campaign is these days. He's like, this is the campaign for you, like that's kind of what he runs on. But the reality is that it almost seems like we've been failed and they've just started kind of moving away from that and supported whoever's giving them funding.
Right. And I feel like it may have been that way for a while, but it feels like they've just stopped trying to hide it.
Yeah.
Like, all right, hey, I'm the guy who's going to pay me. And it's almost like the government's turned into its own business, right? Like, cool, well, we're battling CEOs here. Who's going to fund the thing? And and I don't know, this might not be true or accurate, but this is the perception of me and what I feel like a lot of people have is that it's kind of just this illusion that our vote kind of doesn't really matter, that what we put up there is going to be what it's predetermined and they're going to do their thing. Whether that's true or not, that's just what it feels like, right?
It feels the same for me as well. I tend to get those thoughts as well. But here's an interesting thing that a lot of us may not be familiar with, but we are technically not a democracy. We're a representative democracy, meaning if, so we live in Tennessee, if let's say you and I go to the polls and maybe we both vote for Joe Biden. Tennessee tends to be a very conservative state, and so the likelihood of Biden actually getting the nomination for the state is pretty low.
Right.
And so that's why you see presidents campaign, or not presidents,
Presidential
nominees, candidates campaign in the states where they think that they can win. So like Trump probably won't spend a lot of time in California. Biden probably won't spend a lot of time here. We saw that with Obama's campaign as well. And what happens is our individual votes are supposed to basically tell our representatives who won the bid, but they can still cast their vote
However they feel.
for whomever they want.
Yep. Which is crazy.
It is. I'd be curious to go and see how often the representatives cast in favor of their district.
And I'm sure there was a thought process behind that when it was designed. And I haven't looked into that, but and maybe it was supposed to be layers of separation or something. I don't know, but it's like we elect our representatives and then tell them what to do, but they still get their own choice on what they do on behalf of all of us. And so that, I don't know, that's just kind of nuts.
Yeah. And so right then and there, like your thought is actually very valid. It's very true. I don't know how much of an impact it actually has on the outcome of elections, because I think the representatives probably do vote along with their state, but
or at least
I said, I'd be curious.
We would hope they would. I mean, that's probably something we should, go dig into at some point, but regardless, it's still interesting.
Yeah, certainly. So like the general landscape now feels like it's a popularity contest.
Yeah.
And I think Trump's a good example of that, because while he does a lot of things that are just real shitty, like I'm not going to mince any words, he really tries to just cater to the masses. And I think that's where you've seen like the Twitter feeds and the Twitter polls really take off. And in a way, that's kind of a brilliant moment for him to recognize that the political landscape can be shaped heavily by social media.
I'm glad you brought that up. I know we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, before we hit the record button. But something that just came out this week, I think, was on Netflix, a documentary called, I believe it's called The Social Divide. And it talks about how in the inception of social media, it was, here's this thing that we didn't necessarily know what it was going to be, but it was this awesome idea of how do we share love and how do we share inspiration to all these people? And like, let's create likes and let's create engagement and connection with family and friends. And it's awesome. And then 2 years into Facebook, this guy came in to be like, hey, how are we going to monetize this? What's the business model for it? And he thought, well, the most elegant way to do this is through the advertising system. And what they didn't realize then that they realize now is that all of the habits and everything, like it's the algorithm, the AI is sitting there pointed at your face when you're looking at your phone, scrolling on Facebook, not only seeing what you like and interact with, but when you stop scrolling and how long you look at a photo to really go, oh, okay, well, he likes this. Let me send him more of that. Let me send him more of that. Because the more we're engaged, the more we're potentially around to see an advertisement. So the whole business model is to keep us in our phones on these platforms for as long as possible. As they explain some more of the algorithms and how it works, it's going to continue to show you more of what you want, not a balanced approach of something you might disagree with, which again, it's for your happiness. And the intent of that is wholesome. But then when you see some crazy stuff like, you know what, I'm maybe pretty balanced in my approach here, and then I start seeing something that's more and more extreme and more extreme, and then you're way off to the right or way off to the left. Talking, they talked about different things like different conspiracy theories and stuff that have just blown up because, what did they say? Anything that's fake, like fake news, is 6 times more viral than the truth.
Wow.
So
just think about that.
Yeah.
6 times more viral. And I wonder if that translates to 6 times as many people seeing the fake news. And then that spreads all of the conspiracies. And you can just see this web that expands from that.
And what makes it even more concerning is, I would recommend every person who has a smartphone and any type of social media accounts or access whatsoever to like go watch this. It changed my mind on so many things, and like instantly today I've made all these like, nope, I'm doing things differently, which I'll get into in a minute. But one thing they talked about, they gave a couple of examples.
And what was this that you're talking about? You said that it came out this week or something?
Yeah, it's on Netflix called The Social Divide.
The Social Divide.
It's a documentary. But they showed a couple of examples. They were really quick, and you'll have to watch it to remember which countries they were. But they showed on how when there was somebody, like someone in an office or a dictator or someone who's a bad player, literally destabilized democracy in the country through the platform of social media. And I was like, holy shit. And then it makes sense when there's been all these allegations of in 2016 on, well, Trump won because Facebook, and then other countries allegedly came in and they didn't hack Facebook. They used the platform that was there and used paid advertising as it was designed to fuck with the system.
So can I just kind of recap this and make sure that I understand what it's outlining here?
It's a lot to unpack.
I'm sorry?
It's a lot to unpack.
Sure. Absolutely. So just based off of what you said, it sounds to me like social media has such a control on what people see that it will impact news cycles. And if the news is quote unquote fake news, then that obviously spreads rumors and doesn't give everybody a fair opportunity to be represented to the people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, and it shows, they did a beautiful visual on how historically there's been kind of a separation of right and left. We've never been more separate than we have currently.
Yeah, I believe it. There just seems to be no compromise anywhere.
Yeah.
That's why we end up with the government shutdowns in the winter.
And I hate you and you're wrong and whatever. And it just reminded me why the whole reason we started this podcast was because of this shit. Like, hey, let's sit down and have some conversations about stuff that, sure, a lot of the topics we've hit are stuff that we're pretty aligned on, but let's talk about some stuff that's hard to, and let's try to get a full perspective on it so that way we can have a full picture. And even if I don't agree, I can at least see someone else's perspective and see value in that perspective, even if it's not my own. Because right now, the climate is very much, I'm a Republican, fuck you and your Democrat, whatever. Or vice versa. I'm Democratic and I have these ideals, and how in the world could you be Republican? I'm not talking to you. I'm disowning you.
Or canceled.
Yeah.
Like the cancel culture is just rampant.
Like, holy crap. Like, all you're doing is, what if you're wrong? On either side, what if your perspective is wrong and you're isolating yourself from anyone else who actually has a truth or a different perspective that could lead you to the truth?
Yeah, so, on the note where you said that your perspective could be wrong, and that's absolutely the case, I think one of the problems that we face ties back into the fake news is that, you have to spend hours upon hours researching things, diving into things with an open mind. So it takes the right frame of mind to begin with.
Yeah.
To go in and actually feel confident about an opinion, or to the point where you should be able to feel confident. I think too many people, including myself, will go in feeling very confident about whatever my stance is.
Oh shit, I'm guilty of that.
Like, well, shit, I don't turns out that there's this new news, or that maybe my opinion was based on something that was fake. And so that's yeah, it's a problem, and it's really influencing our society at large beyond the political system. I see these videos on Instagram and Facebook where it'll show, like, particularly with some of the protests, where, like, do you remember that guy who was in a car and he drove through the crowd or something?
Dude.
So I saw a cut of it initially where the guy was driving and, like, just going straight through the crowd, and it's like, oh, he's in here to, like, kill a bunch of people and run them over. But then when you see the whole clip, that's not trying to tell a narrative. It's just trying to say, here's the video.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he took a turn. He drove through there. Turns out that he got, like, stuck. The protesters started attacking, and, like, one thing led to another, and it just,
He was just being aggressive to try to get out.
Yeah. I don't even know that. I think he was stopped. It's been a while since I saw the video. But yeah, it's like, anyway, the point is that there are so many different perspectives that aren't being represented accurately. And then I'll cite another one. This was a proof of concept of the scenario that I just described. There was another video that was trying to convey this exact idea that we're talking about through a video, and it showed three different sections of a video, okay, from different angles. So basically the first scenario was this guy turning the corner of, like, a New York City block or something. So he comes around the corner of a building, and there's a car right next to him, and he's running away from the car. So it looks like that car is trying to, like, kidnap him or shoot him or something. It looks like out of, like, a mob movie or something.
Sure.
And then you see another angle, and it's this guy turning the corner and running towards a guy who's, like, a construction worker or something like that, walking next to some scaffolding, and he's, like, running aggressively at that guy, and it looks like he's going to attack him. And then you see the big picture, and it's this guy jumping out of the car, running to, like, towards the construction worker, and he tackles the construction worker to save him from a falling object.
Dang.
And so it's like all three angles tell the whole story. And that's what I feel like we're missing.
This is the whole story. We're seeing a perspective to spin a story. And so it's a half truth because it's not the full perspective.
It's basically confirmation bias. People are looking for a way to justify and back up their narrative. They're not going into it very scientifically saying, I've got a hypothesis, let me see if there's evidence for it. Instead, they're saying, I've got my opinion, it's already made, let me go make or fabricate evidence to back it up.
Yeah, that hits home, man. That's true.
So it's definitely influencing American society and coming into play with American politics. So I want to go back to kind of that, like, idea of the two-party system and how we got to Joe Biden and Trump as our, or we'll just call it the two choices that we have. You have other choices, as we already said. But
right.
What I've started noticing is that I don't feel like our representatives, whether it's the political parties or whomever it is, are actually looking at America's problems and saying, let's go find the person that can help us solve these problems. Instead, they're looking at ways to beat Trump or beat Biden.
Yeah.
Like, it's like beat the other person. And first of all, I don't want anybody to jump to conclusions. I'm not a Trump supporter. But I did see a Joe Biden ad that came through, and there were no positioning statements about what Biden was campaigning on, or, like, what his thoughts were, the issues that he was trying to solve. The issue that he was trying to solve in that advertisement was getting Trump out of office. And it's like, that's not how you run a campaign. Like, I already know that I don't want to vote for Biden because he's not running on anything. I don't know what he represents.
Yeah. It's nuts that, I mean, you've seen some of it in the past few election cycles where, you know, you'll have the smear campaign of let me make the other guy look bad, whatever, which I still think is shit. Tell me what you're going to do. Don't tell me what the other guy's not going to do.
Right.
Campaign for yourself. Tell me what you're going to do. Sell me on it. You don't walk into an interview and go, hey, all those other candidates are shit.
Right. That's not how this works.
You know,
but apparently it does here in the United States.
Apparently it does. The saddest part is that, you know, I don't want to, I want to be careful with how I say this because I don't want to seem like I'm in this victim space of like, oh, the elite and we're just these little people. But it seems like the elite are playing a game up here, the rich, the influential, and they're fighting each other. And all the rest of us are sitting down here in the crossfire dealing with whatever they end up deciding to do or getting swept up in their political war against each other, not making our lives better at all.
Yeah. And so that comes into play with like, you know, lobbying and cronyism. We may have talked about 2008 during one of our other episodes and the housing crisis that ensued, but just a good example there for anybody that hasn't seen Inside Job. I encourage you to go watch that. And I also want to be open-minded again here and fully transparent. I haven't looked at Inside Job to make sure that everything that they cite is accurate. And so that kind of gets us down that path of it takes so much time and energy to make sure that you've got good sources.
Right.
But anyway, I digress. So Inside Job is basically talking about how the bailouts that we had to bail the financial institutions that were crooks out of their failures when the housing market collapsed and the banks were going to go under. And the people that profited were indeed the executives at those financial institutions. They got bonuses and all sorts of things like that. All I know is that if my company doesn't do well, the company that I work for, not my company.
Yeah.
I'm not getting a bonus next year. Like, it's just kind of how it works. So why is it that they can be on the verge of bankruptcy or effectively in bankruptcy and still get multi-million-dollar bonuses? It's another indication that the government is too tied and influenced by corporations.
So I think a lot of people would agree with that. What I don't know and what I struggle to imagine is what is the solution forward, right? Like, I think almost everyone will agree we're in some version of a mess as is. I know one path is we continue to have the divide and, you know, it turns into another version of a civil war. And does this country even stay together at that point? Does it actually break up? And then, well, what does that even look like? How does that shake out in the long run? You know, even just thinking down that path a little bit, like, well, shit, if we do this north-south thing again, and well, they didn't have communication like they used to last time we had a civil war, would I be even able to call my parents on the phone who live up north if they did? I'm like, shit,
Yeah,
what would that even look like aside from the, you know, guns and bombs flying, right?
I mean, you saw I think it was Iran, where they just turned off internet access. Like, you just couldn't upload anything. That social media, don't get me wrong, it's got its flaws, but it's also kind of the great equalizer because everybody has a voice, and you're like, here's some craziness going on, upload to YouTube. Bam, there it is for everybody.
Yep. So obviously that's the dark path, and I don't want that. And I think it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, this is all we could see and imagine, doom and gloom. But what does the other side of the coin look like?
Let's go down some of the possible solutions that may come up. First, my opinion is that we need to get over the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because I think the majority of us are not pleased with our political party system in its current state. And in And basically, from what I understand, the Democratic and the Republican parties get a lot of funding, and I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but I think it comes from the federal government, i.e., like some tax dollars. So once you pass a certain threshold as a political party that's registered, then you get access to that funding. And so what happens is if you vote for the lesser of two evils, then you're denying one of the other third parties the opportunity to meet that threshold and then get campaign funding.
That makes sense.
And so, like, if you really think that there's somebody out there that you prefer who is not a Republican or a Democrat, go vote for that person. And maybe it's not this time, maybe it's not next election, but maybe that puts us 8 years from now, maybe 8 years from now,
there's enough traction there and real change can happen.
That's right. And
Sure.
it's something like I think it's like 5% of the votes. So it's relatively low.
So I remember in previous conversations, not in this setting, you had some really cool ideas about voting for like not a pair system where you vote for a president and a vice president, but whoever the president is, then the vice president has to be from the other side, and it forces cross collaboration. Explain that idea.
Yeah, so that was actually I think I was listening to a guy named, maybe it's Brett Weinstein. I think that's who it was. I don't want to claim credit for that.
Hey, you told it to me, so I was giving you credit.
I thought it was an interesting idea. But basically the idea there was that you have, it's been months. You have kind of like a duopoly where instead of a vice president and president, you have, I know what it was. I'm sorry. So let's use Biden and Trump as the examples.
Okay.
So let's say Biden gets the majority of the votes. So he holds the presidential title, and then whoever was left over, the next highest number of votes, gets the vice presidency. And so just right there off the bat, you get a balance of power. So there are pros and cons that I can see with that. The pros are that you get a more diversity, essentially is what that is.
Sure.
Diversity of ideas instead of diversity in the traditional way that we think about it, which would be like demographic diversity. But then the negative of that would be that it makes it harder to get things done, because you've got two people that might resist each other on a lot of different ideas. And so I think we'd have to find a way to balance that, and maybe that just gets balanced by the rest of our political party system, where you've got a judiciary and a legislative branch, and within those you have different subsections as well. And so maybe it balances out that way. But yeah, I think that's one way to promote a wider variety of ideas that are getting implemented.
Well, in my mind, it at least sets up a cultural expectation of, okay, well, maybe the guy, or, as things are changing, the girl I voted for didn't get in charge, but they still are there.
And they have a voice.
And
therefore I have a voice.
And culturally, it would set the tone of like, we're going to work together, instead of this us versus you. And you know what? We don't like that bill, so we're just going to stonewall in the House or the Senate because screw you. Instead of going, you know what? What don't you like about it? Where can we compromise? Where can we make good change that represents the majority of the people and move forward? Because I feel like things are just slowing down because we're fighting against ourselves instead of finding a way to move forward. We got to find a way to move forward, and that's what we're missing.
Absolutely. So, like, if I start thinking about these ideas that we're talking about that may be potential solutions, I want to start kind of like categorizing them, I guess.
Okay.
So, like, the first one that I had mentioned, which is like, just vote for the person that's best, not for who's going to get the other person out of office.
Right.
I would call that, like, if we want to categorize that, that's something that you can do in the current political system as it's structured today. The duo political system, I don't know what to call it, but we're the one that we just discussed with the runner-up getting the vice president spot effectively, that would require like a restructuring of the political system. And I don't think a major restructuring.
No, but it would definitely, changes have to be made.
Yeah, and that opens up the question, like, who is responsible for making those changes?
Bro, I don't even know.
Like, who sets this up?
I don't know, man.
Yeah, so this is the kind of conversation that I have with myself and I have with you, where like we start exploring these different ideas and trying to really get to the root of these. So who makes these changes? Like if we said we need, I guess that would be, you'd have to ratify a different amendment for the Constitution.
Yeah, I guess it would just be just like any other type of law or whatever. It would probably have to pass through all the sections of the government, and people have to sign off on it. And so it would have to be pretty called for by everyone to either force them to do it, or they'd all have to really be on board to make it happen. So obviously there's a lot of energy and effort that has to go into that change if it's going to happen. But it's still a good idea, I think, to explore and see what that path looks like.
Yeah, so maybe we'll be able to find something live here about how the running mates are selected or what the history there is. But we don't have to dive deep into that right now. But I agree, like it's going to take some unity. Everybody's got to be on board, or it seems like everybody would have to be on board.
Enough to tip that lever of change.
Right.
Because that's big change. That's not just a little bit of change.
And I'm afraid that we wouldn't get the representation to do that and make that change, because they, again, the parties are not here to serve us, is the way that I feel about it.
It's the perceived sentiment, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, like, what that does is that disseminates the power that people have. And I know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party won't vie for that because they want more and more power. And that's kind of...
And they want to win.
That's exactly what's happening today. Like, it's a catch-22.
And the other thing that I feel like I've seen is it's almost like every time we switch from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican, the first year they spend trying to undo what the last people did.
Yeah, Trump was like, I got to get rid of Obamacare. It's like...
And I'm like, regardless of where you stand on whatever, and sure, some changes probably need to be made, and things will need to be fixed from time to time. I get that. But it's like the expected normal to go, oop, I'm here. Let me erase what the previous person did because I can't move forward until I've erased their mark. I'm like, that's bullshit. Like, just make your mark, make your progress instead of having to undo someone else because they're different perspectives than you. Build on it, make it better. Don't just erase and undo everything. And I feel like we're sitting here with this lack of progress because every 4 or 8 years, typically, it switches hands, and then, oh, we got to undo the last 8 years. Got to fix it. And it's just getting more and more separated and polarized. And you know what? Shit, maybe the solution is that we need to separate states out and find a line somewhere down the middle and go, hey, here's Democratic America, here's Republican America, and let that be. And then maybe we can... then that just devolved worse into war and hating each other. Like, that's not a solution either. I don't know.
Yeah,
we got to find a way to work together, man.
It's a sense of unity, and I think that's where everything's being politicized now. Like the masks, like that's become politicized, and like anything that can be backed up by science shouldn't be politicized. So I'm not here to tell you to wear a mask or not to wear a mask or anything like that. But if you want to prevent yourself from getting the coronavirus, science unanimously says wear a mask. Like, it's that simple. So why did that get politicized? And
Because it's an easy thing on a surface level that's also really charged with, you know, threat and death to divide people. It was an easy tactic, regardless of, you know, where you stand on it or not. It's an easy thing to look at someone and go, you are or are not wearing a mask, divide. And it's like, shit, like, I don't know. I've never successfully convinced somebody of my perspective by hating them and yelling at them and demeaning them. But and believe me, previous versions of me have tried. It just doesn't work. Like, you have to do what we're doing right now. You have to have a conversation and go, all right, hey, I think you're fucking crazy, but let me sit down and hear your perspective and sit in your shoes for a minute to really understand it, and not to understand it so I can manipulate you to my perspective, but with no agenda. Let me see you in your perspective. And then let's turn the table and let you see me in my perspective. Let's learn something and go, all right, how do we take the best of this and move forward?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what like the president's job is to do.
100%.
Take the best of what all of his advisors suggest and make a plan forward. So we kind of talked about, like, at the start of this, that it feels like the two parties are pitted against each other on separate teams. Mm-hmm. And while you were talking about that, it made me realize that maybe it's better for us to start playing on the same team. And I said that, like, naively thinking, yeah, it's like Team America. And then I was like, no, how about Team World?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so we've addressed that. Let's say that we're able to get past our internal divide and we bring these parties together, and effectively that unites the rest of the United States again, because I agree, like, I think there's so much division. We need to be united again and figure out, like, what are the issues that we're facing? And there are tons of them, tons and tons of issues, but, like, we got to pick the low-hanging fruit that's going to have the biggest impact that we can change.
And we got to find that find a way to unify without a crisis, right? Because I've seen we're just a little bit past 9/11, and I saw a bunch of, you know, posts and stuff talking about 9/11 was horrible, but I love the America that was on 9/12, because nobody cared and everyone was just like, locked arms, we're going to take care of each other, we're going to get through this together. How do we get that same, like, let's just care about each other without having it to cost us a disaster?
Same sentiment from the pandemic. At the start of all of this,
Sure,
it was, hey, do you have enough food? Do you need toilet paper? Like,
right?
How are you doing? How's the job going? Like,
everyone was, like, so checking in on each other. There was this huge sense of community, and
it's humanity.
It's almost sad that the only thing that kicks us into caring about people is big level crisis.
Yeah. So what I recognize there is that what unites people is a threat.
Yep.
And that threat could be another country. It could be the disease. It could be a number of things. I think what we need to start looking at is, how do you make the different issues that face America or face the world threats? So, like, let me give an example. One of the big problems that I see is our debt, which we've talked about outside of this episode. We need to make that a threat to our livelihood and our well-being. And we need to make, you know, having a job a threat to our livelihood and our well-being. We need to make COVID-19 a threat to our livelihood and our well-being. So that way we all come together and recognize that these are things that will impact all Americans. Or if you want to, like, a good example might be environmental issues. Those are issues that affect everybody in the world. Those are real threats that we need to go and solve. And, like, let's work together and figure out the best way to solve them, instead of trying to say, like, that's not an issue.
Sure. I'm just curious about what the step beyond that looks like, right? So, sure, maybe we're 100,000 years away from that. But what happens when all of the threats, when all the problems are taken care of, and there's not this big looming thing to attack to keep people together?
I think
how do you keep people together without a perceived threat?
That's a good question. So I think that probably stems into like human psychology, and I don't think it's in our nature right now to not unite against a threat. I think I'm speaking off the cuff here.
Yeah, no, so am I.
But if you think back again to like who we are as a species, we've evolved to have communications from basically the African savannah where we were not top dog and we had to work together and evolve communication, language, body language, bipedalism so that we can see over the tall plains and see far distances so that we can alert everybody else. And so I think our psychology is all derived from threat detection. And so I think that's why we tend to get united over threats.
So how do we evolve past that?
Yeah. And well, and then I think the question is like, is that a problem? So from my perspective, that's not a problem. I think I see where you're going with this, and
Yeah.
you correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're trying to get at is like, we won't always have threats because at a certain point we may become so technologically advanced, like you said, it could be 100,000 years from now, that we'll have the environmental issues resolved. We'll have vaccines for every virus that may exist, etc. But I think that there will always be perceived threats because there will be resource shortages. You might not always have the minerals to use against or to create vaccines, and so like that will be the next threat, is running out of whatever substance it is to come up with the vaccines.
I guess my concern is if we focus just constantly on the threats, and if we start to run out of them, do we start to manufacture them? Right? And so that's where my mind's going, is like, all right, how do we transcend this whole threat stuff? Not ignore threats, because that's stupid. But is there a way that we can start that evolution today where we can figure out a way how to get past this? I can only unify with people who want to attack something with me. How do we unify without needing to attack or being threatened by something? Because if we can get there now, I feel like it solves a lot of problems and then helps us conquer these problems so much quicker.
Yeah, so how do you get unity without having essentially what you're saying is we need unity without a common cause?
Maybe. Or that cause to not be a, like, something we need to attack.
Let me ask this. Are there any things that you would consider a common cause that are not an issue? Like, what's a common music might be one.
Sure. Or even at the base level of recognizing, oh, that's another human. And that's it. And that's all I need. And it doesn't matter if they speak the same language as I do, they have the same skin color as I do. But if we could find a way to just be like, oh shit, that's a human. I love that guy or that girl because they're a human, and I don't need any other excuse or reason to go, hey, that's a good person, and that's my friend. That's, I mean, it may be, I dream big, you know that, but
no, I think that's a beautiful thing. Like that should, it's almost like what's just good for humanity. And it's like just being cordial with one another, making sure that everybody's taken care of. And the older that I get, the more that I lean into that idea. And I think right now what keeps us from attaining that idea is limited resources.
Sure. But again, if we changed our perspective, the resources could be
distributed better.
Yeah. Because again, and not to get into any type of political ideology.
Well, I think it's okay to if you want.
I'm trying to avoid that.
Okay.
Right? Because again, that brings up that threat response of, nope, I don't agree with that. Set all that aside and go, well, you know what? That's a human. I have some, let's take care of that human. And guess what? That's a human that has some, they can take care of me, and together we're all taken care of. And that's hard because a lot of people, I mean, especially in our current capitalistic setup, we're incentivized not to do that. Because you know what? I want to rise to the top, and that's what I've been told culturally success looks like. And I'm not shitting on people who've got great wealth. That's fantastic. But our system as is set up to go, you know what? Take from me and let me, I know I can't build an empire by myself, but okay, well, culturally slavery's wrong. So let me pay people, but let me pay them just as minimum as I can to not let them succeed and go do their own thing so that they're stuck in my whatever, so I can continue to build my empire.
So what I get the sense of is that there's kind of like a moral dilemma that we need to figure out.
Yeah.
Where it's like, what is an appropriate level of living that everybody should be provided? So I think where you're going is like, you need to have, like, people want to build their empire. We bash on Jeff Bezos all the time, and I don't mean to just always target him, but he's the wealthiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
Or, well, to be debated. Shout out to the Saudis.
No shit, bro.
But anyway, so let's just use Jeff Bezos as an example. Like, he wants to build this empire called Amazon, and that he can use it for good, he can use it for bad. He has a lot of control and a lot of political sway. But I guess the problem, on my personal view, is that there shouldn't be anybody that can't get heart medicine while somebody else has 4 yachts.
Sure.
It's like, and then it becomes like this messy, complicated conversation about, well, how do you ensure that before somebody gets their 4th yacht, everybody else in the world gets their heart transplant or whatever the cause is?
And I think it's something you can't police. It has to be an internal, you said it's a morality issue. And so I don't know what the answer to that is and how you shift that internal compass for people. Because again, like, for it to actually be effective, people have to choose it. It can't be a, hey, come on, you got to be good now, and let me slap your hand, because all that does is, fuck you, I'm gonna do my own thing, you know?
So what I've just started thinking about is, like, you and I make a decent income.
Yeah.
Not wealthy by any means, but like enough to get by and have some luxuries and things like that. Like, why am I just bought a new TV. Why did I buy a new TV when my other one was working? Like, why didn't I just take that $500 and say, like, hey, here's a charity that I can support?
Or to an actual individual in your life that you know, hey, let me help out.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it's cultural that we constantly have to be upgrading, and I think we've traded true personal evolution for material collection.
Yes.
And so
the material collection, though, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to get away from that thought. The material collection, though, provides sometimes necessities, but more often comforts.
Sure. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like we all need to go be poor or, kill yourself to help other people. I don't know. It's like we've determined that at the end of, my journey, oh, I'm a good person, or I've succeeded because I have $1 billion or whatever that number is for you, right? And I don't know if that's the right mark.
So let's ask this. Do you think that there's a critical mass that we can achieve if each of us as individuals just start actually committing to giving up our next luxury item and providing to somebody that needs some support? It might not even be money. It might be time or something like that, but just being more volunteering. And then do you think that can kind of result in a snowball effect to where that does start bleeding across all of humanity?
I think so, but I want to be really careful about this because I know there's a lot of like spiritual traditions and stuff like that that teach this, and I think they're onto something. But it has to come out of a desire, not an obligation, right? Because if I'm obligated to just whatever, now I have to do this.
Then we're back at the dilemma where somebody's got to figure out, is the fourth yacht enough? Is it the second yacht?
Exactly. So, and I think that line of me paying it forward is maybe a good way to say it, is an individual line, but I think everyone should pay it forward. And I think if we can do that, I'll be honest, like as a kid, I looked forward to Christmas so hard. I think every kid does. What cool shit am I going to get? As an adult, I look forward to Christmas even more because I'm like, oh shit, I can't wait to give this. I know that's probably just an American, but my perspective has changed going, I actually get more value out of creating happiness for someone else than I do hoarding happiness for myself. And I think that's the critical mass we're talking about.
Absolutely. Like, how do we bring that joy or that sense of community back to other people? And so tying it all back into the Trump and Biden conversation, I don't know much about their donation history or anything like that, but
me either.
I guess the question comes back to, like, are these guys the right guys to represent that kind of mindset?
I don't think so. I could be wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong, but based on, the conversation we just had, I don't think so. So how do we get there? Right? And obviously this is big systemic global change we're talking about. How do we start affecting that on a small scale?
So can we say that, to simplify things and kind of boil it all down, is it fair to say that the root causes of virtually all issues that we as people face is due to a lack of humanity?
That's a bold statement, but I'm going to venture to say yeah.
Okay. And we'll throw a little asterisk on there.
Of course.
Understood that you don't have enough resources to provide everything that everybody could possibly need. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but it's definitely true that we're nowhere close to ensuring that everybody has a relatively good standard of living.
Right.
And so I think maybe that might be what I start hanging my hat on whenever I'm looking for my next leader, is like, what level of humanity do you represent?
It's good, dude. I like that.
And that takes some research.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Interesting. So yeah, I think maybe that's how we start solving this. And again, this is why I kind of like going down the conversations of like trying to get to the root cause of these issues, is because that helps you shape the future and how you can create a different outlook. And I think that there have been takeaways for everybody here. Before we move on, I do want to highlight a couple other things that I think are facing the United States right now. And maybe we can try to apply this concept that we just discussed of just generally speaking humanity to some of these concepts. So like one of the notes that I wrote down is getting elected is essentially a popularity contest.
We touched on that.
And people like free stuff. So there's a big trend right now for free healthcare, free education, free housing, universal basic income. So just free spending money, whatever it is. So let's take those 4 examples and kind of break them down. For me, I think healthcare, we can agree. I shouldn't say that. Let's be respectful that maybe somebody thinks that not everybody deserves healthcare. I would hope that everybody were able to get the healthcare that they need.
I think I agree with you, but I also think that our healthcare system probably needs an overhaul, just because it seems like they're treating symptoms, not sicknesses or people. And so, because there's more money in it. And again, it's self-serving versus people-serving or humanity. And it's wrapped up in, healthcare. But, and that's a fine line to walk, because I know there's extremes on both sides of that. But yeah, I would agree that health for people, being healthy, hell yeah.
Kind of a need, like you might say.
A little bit.
And then, of course, like I don't want to just gloss over the fact that there are so many nuances. It's like, if somebody is 78 and a half years old, like, well, how many resources do you devote to try to squeeze out another 2 years of their life?
Sure.
Because those resources could be taking away from somebody who is 24 and is having a heart transplant, and that heart transplant would give them 60 years of life or whatever it may be. Like, there are just so many tough decisions to be made along the way. But if you think about like the humanity side of things, maybe before we buy our first yacht, we say, hey, do me and my family have everything that we need? And maybe even a little bit more, so to say, do we have enough to provide for ourselves in the event that there's a catastrophe?
Sure.
And so, like, you have a little nest egg of resources.
Let's be real, bro. If I'm buying a yacht, I'm going to have plenty of money for a nest egg.
Yeah, right. And then, so, like, how about instead of buying the yacht, we go and find somebody who's, oh my goodness. This just slipped my mind right there. It was on the tip of my tongue. But it's is it Johns Hopkins? Oh, man. The organization that Make-A-Wish.
Oh, okay.
No, that's not even it. Fuck.
St. Jude?
What? St. Jude. Thank you so much. Nailed it. 10 out of 10. Like, they're giving cancer treatment, especially to children. Like, get rid of those kids' cancer.
Yeah.
Before you get a yacht. Like, take that $4 million and say, that's all St. Jude's money. Like, go knock it out. Maybe St. Jude's isn't the best organization. I don't know. I haven't looked into them, but they seem like they do some good things.
Sure.
But, like, let's go find those.
Yeah, I'm with that, man. But again, the other side of the coin, there has to be balance to it too, because I'm not trying to say that those who have wealth, and hopefully it's me one day, can't enjoy wealth, but I don't think it should be at the expense of other people.
And then, so let me ask you this, because this is, I think, what the counter argument would be. And first of all, I want to say that, like, I agree. Like, if you are a hard worker and you're really, really striving to get ahead, maybe you're putting in 2 times as much effort as everybody else. Like, maybe there should be some reward or some value in doing that. And maybe the value is that you are in control of where your additional resources go.
Sure.
And you get to choose the cause.
Or what about, what about a windfall? I didn't earn it, but I'm still in control of it. And here, that I don't think that makes it any less deserving of being able to experience some of the things that wealth can bring without guilt, if that makes sense.
Can you elaborate more?
Sure. So I win the jackpot and I have $400 million. Cut that in half because of taxes. But just because I maybe didn't work, I still have it, right? I don't think I should have to be guilty, or anyone for that matter should feel guilty, because there's a balance between paying it forward and taking on a messiah complex, right? A single individual, regardless of what resources they have, is not solely responsible to change the planet, right? Just because you've got more resources, sure, maybe you have more responsibility, but it doesn't mean it's all on your shoulders. It still takes everybody.
I agree. And so that's where I started thinking that there's like a critical mass of people that if they all share the same mindset,
Sure.
that it creates that snowball effect and starts just building on itself. And so you no longer have people dying of malaria or starvation and all these different things that like cause children to die, because I think children is a good spot to look, because those are the people who have like the brightest potential outcome.
Yeah. And if you don't care about kids, or
Then fuck you.
no, there's deeper problems, and let's figure out how to find your soul again. But then let's talk.
Sure. Maybe somebody got like shot by some kid with a slingshot or something. They got beef with kids.
Yeah, maybe.
But I digress. So like, let me start breaking that down more. So let's say you win a jackpot and you've got $500 million. I want to say that prior to this exact podcast, I would have been 100% in with you, and I've been like, dude, it's your money. Go spend it how you want. Like, go enjoy it. And like my mindset is changing live as we speak.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think that no, you shouldn't feel guilty, and no, the burden doesn't rest entirely on your shoulders. But what I do think that you should do is, if you got $500 million, maybe it's time to take a look at it and say like, well, $5 million would be enough for the rest of my life and for my kids. And so that's everybody that I care about. And how do I spend the remaining $495 million in ensuring that everybody else has a better life and just level up everybody else? Why not that mentality?
No, I don't disagree. But again, it just depends on your approach and what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
If you're only taking $5 million for yourself, you know, think about plans to go, okay, how do I create this new whatever? That shit takes capital. And so, cool, now I can fund all of these cool ideas that I have to help. And maybe that's what you're talking about, is that 495 being in the making things better, and that's where it lands. But the other thing that I think we don't think about too, compared to people, go ahead.
Before we moved on from that, so are you saying that like maybe that $495 million, this kind of brings us back into like the conversation about, are billionaires inherently bad?
Right.
That $495 million could be used to start a business that is, maybe it is a profitable business, but it provides jobs for everybody.
Yep. And so that's right where I was headed, is you and I have never had that kind of money. So
you know. Kidding.
Bro, you holding out on me. We've not had that kind of money, so it's hard to be in that mindset of going, we've always experienced, and most of the people going to be listening to this, if not all of them, have experienced this. I go to work, I get paid, and you trade your time for money. When you have that, now you have money that can create money. And so part of that potential responsibility is, let me create a business or a money engine, if you will, that goes, hey, I'm just going to continually spinning here and pumping out money. And even if I just sustain and don't grow, but I just maintain it, all of those people in that engine making it move forward are now sustained. And if there's profit or some coming back, hey, you know what? That's great, because now I can create another engine. And it's a fine line between, let me get barely paid slave labor and let me create a good system that takes care of people, that in and of itself, the business itself creates value and pays it forward. And I think a lot of things start with that intention and then go sideways sometimes, especially at a generation change.
Yeah. So what I'm taking away there is that I think the line kind of gets drawn at, it's not wealth that's the issue. It's like the personal luxuries that start becoming the issue.
Okay.
So,
for example, play it out for me.
Yeah. So let's say that you did win that $500 million jackpot, and you said $5 million is my family's little nest egg, and that's 2 times the average American's lifetime salary. So I know that my wife and I are set, and then my kids will have a good start to life. And that's pretty much all anybody can ask for or need. And then the remaining $495 million gets invested into a business. That to me is perfectly fine. Like, I love that idea, because again, to that point, Like that business is providing for other people. They're part of society. They have an additional meaning to life, which is to help build whatever this business is and move it forward and its ideas.
So what if I take, hypothetically, me in this situation again, what if I take $20-30 million and build out this expansive, huge ass house for me to live in as part of that? Does that cross your line?
Yeah.
Well, now, what if I use that as a cool, here's a place for people to come and enjoy and taste this experience of wealth, not for me to flex on and be like, oh, look at me, I've got this. But no, here's an opportunity for you to taste something spectacular at no charge. But you come in and experience this, and in there you help, and it's a way to bump shoulders and facilitate stuff with people. Intention is different, but it's still luxury.
So it's giving back. Yeah. And I think that makes sense to me.
Okay.
I think I'd be okay with that.
I was just curious where that line, and so it's not so much even luxury. If distilling it further, it's intention.
But I guess where I think one of the counter arguments would go, and I'm taking things to the extreme to really see how they play out.
Yeah.
But why do that? It goes back to the low-hanging fruit conversation. Is the most urgent need for humanity at large right now for people to taste the experience of luxury, or is it to make sure that the kids in Africa have food?
If all of humanity operated at the space we're talking about, paying it forward, think of it like a single human body. Everyone's going to have a different role, doing different things. You can't have all noses.
Yeah.
That doesn't function. And so I think there's space for all of it, right? For people to taste the luxury, but also for people to be fed.
So I thought about that before I made that comment.
Okay.
If I use your human body analogy again, though, every part of your body still needs water.
Sure.
And so it's like, why are the fundamental needs not being met?
It's a good call.
And so before you grow a nose, like you got to have water in your cells to make the skin and the bones. Or I don't know what the fuck we're getting into.
I'm following you, man.
Yeah.
I'm following you.
So I think there's like a threshold. But anyway, I think we can ramble on about this, and like we've moved so far away from Biden and Trump and like the situation that we're in, but it's all part of building a better solution for America or for humanity at large. And I think that's kind of the takeaway that we're realizing, is that we all need to start being unified and start looking at everybody else's needs beyond just our small social circle. And in my opinion, what I want to start doing more of is looking at like spending some time and deciding what my personal opinion is on what people's threshold is for needs, and making sure that as many people that I know or that I can influence hit that threshold. And maybe you draw your line at healthcare, and not everybody deserves healthcare. Maybe everybody does deserve healthcare. I think that's for the individual, each of us, to kind of decide and figure out.
Well, right. And again, that goes back to that individual cells of a whole body. Hey, this person is going to distribute this, or take care of and facilitate, because distribute can be triggering. But yeah, finding out what that role is for you as an individual. It's good.
And right now, what I think I'm seeing a lot of is our wealthy elite are using their wealth not to make humanity better, but to put them in a better position.
Yep.
And it's abuse.
Yep.
It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Not at all where I expected to go with this.
Neither did I. Like, we started off like in politics and talking about, upcoming election, and here we are going, well, let's just pay it forward, people.
I mean, seriously. So, that's something that I'm taking on as a personal responsibility, to just kind of look at how I can give back more.
I like it, man.
So, should be good.
I like it. Well, is there anything else we want to cover before we wrap? That seems like a good spot to close this.
There's a lot that we didn't touch on, but you know what? I'm all right with that. I think that we tore this one apart, dove in, tried to understand why we're in the position that we're in, and came down to not everybody has enough humanity.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you all next time.